Hello and welcome back to the APUS History Curriculum for Era 6. In this video, we're looking at topic 6.10, the development of the middle class. This is another significant socioeconomic change that took place during the Gilded Age and has strong ties to the industrialization that was occurring in this time period. We will pay particular attention to the effects that this had on society. So let's go ahead and get to it. The market revolution of the 1830s and 40s, and again with the Industrial Revolution during the Gilded Age, had changed the relationship between business owners and workers. As businesses grew larger and more complex, owners became increasingly separated from their workers, creating the need for managers and clerical workers to form a middle layer between labor and owners. This, in turn, expanded what had been a relatively small middle class. They had higher pay levels than the average worker, giving rise to disposable income that could purchase more consumer goods, which were increasing supply because of the Industrial Revolution itself. And many required education. Those involved in management often needed a higher level of education to complete their jobs, so this caused an educational shift during the Gilded Age. So colleges and universities began to shift away from training ministers and added technological training in sciences and engineering to their curriculum. Business colleges also expanded to meet the need for these white-collar workers. Young women were also increasingly being encouraged to complete high school, and more college opportunities were becoming available to them so that they could pursue jobs in teaching, nursing, or in secretarial positions. Work weeks were still long, averaging about 60 hours per week in 1890. But this was 6 hours shorter than it had been in 1860. Giving the typical American, especially the factory worker and the middle class, more free time each week. So what did Americans do with all of this time? Well, there was participation in sports, leisure, and amusement activities. Large-scale public performances could be offered in opera houses and concert halls that popped up in the large cities across the U.S. By the turn of the century, there were at least 25 major concert halls or opera houses spread across the U.S., with 4 in New York City alone. And away from the live performances, Americans could have pre-recorded music in their homes, thanks to Thomas Edison's phonograph. Sound could be recorded onto cylinders and played back later. As for what people listened to, well, the genre varied, but marches, such as those developed by John Philip Sousa, were particularly popular. Other popular amusements included the circus, which featured performers, exotic animals, and oddities. Unlike European circuses, American circuses tended to travel around by rail, stopping in cities and towns for a few days at a time. In the 1870s, P.T. Barnum, who had already established a museum of oddities, took his show on the road, calling it the greatest show on earth. He even had a large African elephant, named Jumbo, on display. Following the circus model, and appealing to America's fascination with the West, Buffalo Bill Cody established a Western-themed show, featuring horse culture groups from around the world, U.S. military groups, cowboys, Native Americans, and even well-known Westerners like sharpshooter Annie Oakley. Other forms of mass entertainment also flourished, with the most popular form of urban performance being the vaudeville show. An evening at vaudeville might last 2 or 3 hours as audience watched 9 or 10 different acts, ranging from singing and dancing to stand-up comedy to acrobatics. The first dedicated theater for vaudeville opened in 1881 in Manhattan. Eventually, New York had 10 vaudeville theaters, and every major city could boast at least one. Still other forms of amusement in this late Victorian era in the U.S. included more mundane activities like bicycle riding as a means of social activity. Also a sports craze that was spreading across the nation. Baseball was quickly becoming the national pastime. It had graduated from a gentleman's game to a form of mass entertainment. As cities and towns dedicated more and more public land for recreational purposes, baseball became more and more popular. Those who did not enjoy playing had the opportunity to watch. The National League was formed in 1876, and touring professionals traveled around so that Americans in various cities could watch them play the game. As a color barrier was quickly established, though, not all athletes were allowed to play, although there were what were called Negro leagues, offering some opportunities for African American athletes. The National League in baseball and its rival, the American League, would play for the first World Series championship in 1903. And this baseball craze eventually led to the financing of large grandstand arenas in the early 20th century, such as Fenway Park in Boston and Wrigley Field in Chicago. Other spectator sports were also popular. Football had a large following, particularly on the college level. Universities at one time were actually accused of hiring ringers or professionals who would help them win games, because the rules were fairly lax at the time, and often this actually resulted in a lot of injuries. In fact, in 1905, 18 players were killed by injuries related to playing football. Boxing had even become a more respectable sport with a new innovation of the late Gilded Age: gloves. And basketball was invented in 1891 in Springfield, Massachusetts, by a YMCA instructor. It was designed as an indoor sport so that basketball could allow for athletic competition during the winter months. And of course, you still had croquet and tennis, which provided really the only opportunity in sports for co-ed play. Another factor that contributed to the development of the middle class was the philanthropy of the wealthy, who subscribed to the idea of the gospel of wealth. Some leading industrialists really could not reconcile their Christian beliefs with the ideas of social Darwinism that we talked about previously. Men like Andrew Carnegie, they did believe that having disparity of wealth was a good thing, saying that, quote, much better this great irregularity than universal squalor. But at the same time, he did question what was the proper way that wealth should be administered, since it had been gifted into the hands of the few. Ultimately, he concluded that, quote, in bestowing charity, the main consideration should be to help those who will help themselves, to provide part of the means by which those who desire to improve may do so, to give those who desire to rise the aids by which they may rise. I believe in giving charity to individuals, but to society, so that those in society who possessed a strong desire to rise up above their station would be able to do so, but still through their own efforts. This is the belief that came to be known as the gospel of wealth, and is why Carnegie donated so much of his wealth, especially to build approximately 3,000 libraries, plus giving money to many colleges and museums as well. The proverb, give a man a fish and you will feed him for a day, teach him how to fish and you will feed him for a lifetime, perfectly describes this philosophy. And he's not the only industrialist that followed this. He's just one of the first and one of the most well-known. Many other industrialists later followed this, particularly focusing on education, because individuals who lacked education could choose to pursue it, and then that could change things for them. Well, that about covers what you need to know for topic 6.10, the development of the middle class. Be sure to keep up with your reading, and I'll catch you in the next video.